Immersion. What a big bang of a word to start a video with. Regardless of medium, I think most creative works strive towards achieving it. And most of us consumers desperately search for the works that allow us to be immersed in them. To feel like you're organically taking part in an unfolding story, be that the story of Kratos desperately trying to yeet his recently deceased wife's ashes off a cliff, or the tale of Scorpion whooping Sub-Zero's sub-zero degree ass across the nether realms, will inevitably elicit some very powerful emotional responses from us, whether we'd like to admit it or not. In games, you don't always have the same opportunities for immersion as other mediums. Presenting someone with an explorable world, for example, creates a whole lot more work than shooting film from one specific angle, or, writing words on a paper and having people imagine a cohesive setting. You can model, texture, and render a breathtakingly stunning jungle, but if the player stumbles upon one rock with an out-of-place texture, well, you might just be out of luck. Still, there are some medium-agnostic classic tips to promote immersive experiences, one of which is to create humanized, three-dimensional characters. Make them, relatable in one way or another, like having them struggle with common problems from the human experience. Maybe they have an estranged loved one, or trouble dealing with their mortality. Perhaps I might even tempt you with a character with a substance issue? Obviously, you still need to invest some time into having, at the very least, non-shit writing, but these cliched narrative archetypes have turned into cliches for a reason. We're all human after all. Being able to relate with a character in fiction in some way drastically ups the odds of us getting immersed into a narrative. But how do you create an immersive experience when all your characters are, let's say, somewhat inhuman? Mechanicus is a 2018 game set in the far-flung future of the Warhammer universe, where you consort with and control a group of what one might loosely describe as post-human tech enthusiasts, exploring and, for lack of a better word, pillaging an alien planet. The gameplay of Mechanicus is broken down into squad management and tactical turn-based strategy sections, a la XCOM, though with enough twists to make it its own thing. I'm not here to talk to you about the gameplay much, however, though I will still take some time here to show you this gun I put on one of my dudes that has a blast radius that more or less covers the entire map. It's pretty sweet. No, what interests me about Mechanicus is that despite it being somewhat sparsely populated by lore and really any narrative push, lacking variety and being completely devoid of any traditionally relatable characters, the crew consisting of obsessively dogmatic space Catholics who all speak in demonic binary. I still ended up finding it to be one of the more immersive gaming experiences I've had in a long time. Why is that? For one, I think the art and sound design of the game is both masterful and multifaceted. We've already been sort of introduced to our human friends in the Mechanicus cohort, but in a logical and thematic twist, the adversary you will face in the game are the entirely mechanical aliens called Necrons, a race of hyper-advanced robotic skeletons who you instantly know are up to some bad juju when you lay your eyes on them. I mean, we've all seen Terminator, right? You just know these guys ain't right. I mean, their weapons are called gauss flayers. Nobody nice have ever said, I was thinking about the name for the gun. What about flayer? Never mind that your guy is running around with something called a solar atomizer. That's just good branding. So you're creeping around these labyrinthine complexes, dodging gauss shots left and right, looking for ways to stop these abominable aliens from fully awakening, while also studying their fascinating, highly heretical technology. But then you run into some sort of head honcho looking Terminator, and it starts talking to you.
I wake with the turning of aeons. Stars yet burn, life yet blossoms.
No longer is the dialogue in the game entirely relegated to the, let's say, mildly unsettling binary transmissions of your cohort. We're back to actually intelligible language. Of course, your crew all react in the most reasonable way possible and immediately call for the destruction of every Necron present, and preferably the entirety of the planet. To me, the developers of the game hit upon a great dichotomy of unsettling and relatable qualities in both your friends and your foes. The overlords of the Necrons speaking to your crew in plain English and rebuking their quests as one of filthy grave robbers spells out a certain doubt as to who is really in the right here. Your crewmates in the cohort, never wavering on peace not being an option, also paints them as uncooperative, biased assholes. Then again, the Necrons do look like skeletons with glowing green eyes and are wasting no time lighting your asses up the second you pop your face out of cover. I thought a bit about what really sold me on the game and also pushed me over the edge to wholeheartedly side with the creepy, zealous, genocidal tomb robbers. For one, while the writing is somewhat sparse, the characterization of your cohort is great. While they all share in their total obsession with the technological pursuits of the machine, they express it in different ways. Some of them quite literally reading out snippets of scripture from holy text, and others being more interested in looting alien tech to further their understanding. These characters, while all united in their hatred of the alien, all constantly bicker like little children. A bickering that is written in a sort of detached, but also somewhat humorous way. The most human character, who mostly pops up to remind the rest of the cohort that the lives being expended are actually people, gets regularly met by rude dismissals by the rest of the gang in an almost always Sunny-esque manner.
Shut up, bitch, you don't deserve anything.
Secondly, a very simple but elegant trick that threw away any and all pretense of me ever siding with the Necrons in this feud is how their speech speed is handled. Now, this might seem weird, but bear with me. Because your cohort all communicate with blurts of binary, the time spent going through interactions is only really bottlenecked by your reading speed. The Necrons, in their glorious expression of the English language, all commit to one fatal flaw, however. They all talk real slow.
I wake with the turning of aeons.
Like, real fucking slow. Somebody tell the orchestra to start playing this guy off, he won't fucking stop. Mechanicus is in general extremely light on exposition and very heavy on mood. It doesn't really care that much if you know anything about the Warhammer setting before diving into the game. Nor do I believe it would necessarily matter much. And in this, it becomes a very well-paced game. The amount of time you're forced into spending in one section of the game is always very short. Something that really helps the otherwise sparse production shine. While I do commend the artists that put their work into the game, especially the sound designers and illustrators, when you step back and take it all in, your cohort are all made up of more or less an image in a box. They're all very nicely drawn images in boxes, but still, images in boxes. Contrast this with Warhammer 40,000 Demon Hunters Chaos Gate, That's a fucking mouthful. Another extremely similar XCOM-like, also set within the Warhammer universe. Unlike Mechanicus, with its sparse library of assets and mechanics, Chaos Gate presents the player with a much larger breadth of subsystems, fully modeled characters, cinematics, and voice acting. For all intents and purposes, Chaos Gate is a more highly produced experience than Mechanicus. And it almost completely fails to grab me. For every boon the higher production value could have given Chaos Gate, a misstep turns a potential advantage into a negative. In Chaos Gate, the player assumes the role of an unnamed commander. I know this because the NPCs in the game keep referring to me as such.
Commander. The commander. You have appointed him to take the commander's place?
However, instead of doubling down on this concept and presenting the game entirely through my first-person eyes, Chaos Gate constantly pushes cinematic camera angles that highlight the fact that while the game world is populated by all these named characters, I am in fact nowhere to be fucking seen. I'm supposed to be meeting this character in this cutscene. So, where the fuck am I? Maybe I'm just really tiny. On the other hand, I have absolutely no idea who I am supposed to be in Mechanicus. Am I this guy? Maybe. I don't know. It's also highly possible that I am some unknown, unvoiced character entirely. Maybe I'm a subroutine in a computer. It's not relevant and crucially not something that the game bothers to try and tackle. Chaos Gate presenting the player with a bunch of voice-acted characters is also something it sort of half-asses. During gameplay moments where I get to experience the world from this first-person perspective, conversations with the NPCs are only partially voiced. Now, this is not necessarily the worst outcome in the world, but the placement of these voice lines is totally baffling. Instead of having the beginning of a sentence be the highlighted voiced part, it seems to be entirely fucking random. Which means I can't listen to the voiced part of the conversation and then continue reading. I instead have to wait and then reorientate myself to the beginning of the text box and then start reading again. Like, who the fuck thought that was a good idea? This means basically the only positive instance brought on by the game's increased amount of voice acting happens in the cinematics, which, as we've already covered, are all shot in a way that are actively breaking my immersion. The same sort of criticism can be levied towards the UI of the game. While I would hesitate to call the combat UI of Mechanicus amazing, it presents a cohesive enough front that meshes well with the mood of the game, while also being very unintrusive. One could imagine Mechanicus UI as a diegetic part of the world, but one could just as easily entirely zone it out of one's experience. Chaos Gate, however, seems to want to have it both ways. The game UI is big, bright, ever-present, and ever in your face. While graphically quite impressive and at times thematically linked to the world, the fact that it cannot be ignored and, for lack of a better word, feels very gamey, leads to it hindering immersion more than helping it. Like, am I supposed to believe this is some sort of heads-up display that me, the invisible commander, is viewing the world through? If so, why does the game just pop random assets in my face when I complete a mission? Like, is this helmet part of the UI? And are the zoom-ins and the slow-motion cuts that happen every time my dude throws a grenade camera moves directed by the commander? If so, I think that guy needs to get a hobby and stop letting his ambition of directing film bleed into his military life. In contrast here, Mechanicus provides a direct diegetic reason for the perspective of the game being the way it is, with a command map in the middle of the room you inhabit. But it's also unintrusive enough that you can sort of miss it and ignore it. It's hard to ignore anything in Chaos Gate when basically every action you can take is preceded by recurring, uninterrupted cutscenes that offer unexplainable perspectives of the world, followed by loading screens with fucking tips on them. I suppose one could summarize Mechanicus' approach to immersion as all-inclusive. The totality of all these small things, all pointing in one direction and never letting up. Never giving the player an out from the mood it is trying to achieve. Something that creates a breeding ground for true immersion, which then brings me to Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. What? Did you think I would go an entire video without talking about Third Strike? That just because I made this custom animated Space Marine, that the video was actually about Warhammer?
You are an idiot who has been fooled.
Now, it might seem odd to link the aesthetic and immersive qualities of Mechanicus to a game like Third Strike, but to me, they are both connected through one key word: earnestness. There is no capitulation to the ironic or sarcastic in any of their presentation. No ground given to the idea that Necro, the stretchy Russian mutant, is ridiculous. No consideration to the thought that a mechanically augmented archbishop is a laughable concept. Now, to be fair, Third Strike obviously isn't shooting for the same thematic objective as Mechanicus. If it were, it would probably be a lot darker and feature way more creepy uncles and plasma rifles. No, while Mechanicus is trying to portray an unsettling world through a normalized perspective, Third Strike is instead wholly focused on being cool. Maybe that sounds like a no-brainer. Like, duh, it's a fighting game. They all kinda try to be cool. Like, have you seen the guy who makes Guilty Gear?
That is bullshit. Blazing, still my heart is blazing.
It's been a pretty long time now since we culturally entered this sort of post-ironic media climate where it feels like nothing is allowed to exist as a cohesive and sincere work. It's hard to really pinpoint an exact origin, but this subversion of sincerity bled from TV like Firefly into cinema through stuff like the MCU, which then spread like wildfire, leading us back into games. If you don't quite follow, a great example of this is how quippy characters undermine any tonally poignant moment, which acts as a reversal of sort and lets the air out of the proverbial balloon. Someone does something really heroic, undercut it with them not quite sticking the landing. If there's a romantic moment, well, cut the tension with a joke from a third character. Granted, it is a bit harder to pinpoint exactly how these things show up in games, since there are so many ways to potentially cut the cord of sincerity or tension. In some scenarios, it can be as easy as reminding the player that they're playing a game. In others, you get literal copycats of, dare I say, cringy MCU-esque dialogue, which is how you end up with stuff like Forspoken.
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I'm sorry for showing you that. Now, I don't think fighting games really stray too far down this treacherous path. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they are one of the least impacted genres out there, possibly tied with, like racing sims, or whatever iteration of lawnmower simulators all the Germans are playing nowadays. But it is kind of impossible to completely remove yourself from this cultural climate, which sadly means that when it comes to undercutting mood, a very little goes a very lot. And that is especially true when it comes to anything that even hints at coolness. So, what is really so cool about Third Strike's presentation? I don't even know where to start with this. I mean, what isn't cool about Third Strike? It has a legendarily cool soundtrack, one of the most outstanding and coolest set of sprite animation ever created, and sound design to die for. But we have to start somewhere, right? And as we're talking about a fighting game, what better place to begin than with our fighters? Truthfully, it is quite hard for me to think of another game that rivals Third Strike in this pursuit. Unlike in most fighting games, or really any game with a roster, every single character in the game is taken seriously and presented as being really cool. Sure, some of them might at times have some goofy moments or qualities, but unlike in, say, Street Fighter 4, these characters aren't goofy characters that are sometimes cool, they are cool characters that are sometimes goofy. Something that I think makes a world of difference. The character Rufus in Street Fighter 4 gives that game an out. If someone looks at Street Fighter 4 and thinks it's lame that the game seems to think that this guy doing weird helicopter moves is cool, Rufus and Dan and Blanca and the googly eyes appearing during Ultra Freeze all give them an out. It cuts the tension, just like how an ironic quip can undercut tense dramatic or romantic moments in a lot of modern cinema. I would argue that there really isn't any of that in Third Strike. The characters all exude confidence in a sort of relaxed, almost coy way. Just compare how serious deuteragonist Ken is portrayed in Third Strike compared to Street Fighter 4. Do I really have to say much? I know it's not all their fault. I mean, they were going for this Owen Wilson looking motherfucker after all. Still, it ain't great. Video games, and fighting games specifically, are unquestionably in part an exercise in role-playing. You are, after all, directly holding the reins of an avatar. I wouldn't dare say somebody would be in the wrong for liking this version of Ken more than this one, but I know which one is taken more seriously by its own game. Now, there are definitely moments in the characterization of the roster in Third Strike that you could describe as playful or funny, but these are almost exclusively not making the character performing them the butt of the joke. Like Necro weirdly teasing the opponent, Sean tossing the basketball in someone's face, or Ibuki leapfrogging over another player. You could look at those moments as not primarily cool, but I definitely don't think any of them act as tension cutters for the game's overall mood. It's important to note that you might not think that any of these characters are cool. Maybe you think Ken is a dumb shud and fireballs are lame AF. But that's not what I'm getting at. We all have preferences. The point I'm trying to make is that Third Strike isn't trying to convince you it is cool. It is already itself convinced that it's cool. This distinction might seem odd, but hear me out. The in-game universe of Street Fighter 4 in its arcadey goodness paints Ken as a sort of He-Man-esque good guy, a Saturday morning cartoon character to pull on the strings of people's nostalgia. He's a blast from the past. And while he's certainly represented as a fun blast from the past, the cartoonish nature of the game acknowledges that he is, in that nostalgic space, also pretty silly. The game of Third Strike, however, is 100% certain that Ken is cool. Throwing fireballs is cool, doing hurricane kicks is cool, and punishing a whiffed sweep with low forward into super is damn well cool. To cement how little Third Strike cares about your opinion on its coolness, look no further than the game's arcade intro. Think about what an intro is supposed to do. It's there to wow passersby to stop and give the cabinet a second glance and maybe even a quarter or two. The contemporaries of Third Strike all offer these bombastic animations with characters fighting and clearly defined shots of protagonists. Look at us, please look at us, they're screaming. Third Strike, though, doesn't give a single fuck. It doesn't care to lure you in with cool cinematics or shots of the characters. It's just vibing.
strike, y'all, is Street Fighter 3.
Now, fighting games certainly don't have to be cool to be good. There are certainly lots of other aesthetics to chase, and games don't have to look great to play great either, though I'd certainly say it helps. Hell, Street Fighter 3 itself lacked this cohesive mood for its first 2 full iterations. New Generation and Second Impact both kind of fumbled the ball when it comes to their presentation. Don't get me wrong, there's still a bunch of great stuff in there, no doubt about that, but the creative team definitely ended up not fully committing to any one vision. The UI and the music is sort of all over the place. The characters, while still all animated in the same slick way, all have voices that are seriously lacking in tune. Unless you're into Michael Jackson, I guess.
You can't escape!
Most of the stages similarly lack the laid-back coolness of Third Strike, with lots of them falling way more in line with Street Fighter II's caricature-esque presentation of characters and culture. I mean, Ibuki's stage in New Generation and Second Impact is a ninja village with a bunch of ninjas doing ninja shit. Get it? It's because Ibuki is a ninja. While in Third Strike, it's this scenic depiction of a country road where you can quite easily imagine our fighters having a gunslinger-esque stare down before engaging in battle. Yes, it certainly took a while for the team at Capcom to nail the mood and aesthetic of Street Fighter 3. Another developer, though, knocked it straight out of the park that very same year. Tekken 3 to me represents a game that, just like Third Strike, adopted an arguably entirely cool-centric identity and ran with it. And in that view of itself, feels way more timeless to me than almost all of its sister titles in the series. Not only was it, just like Third Strike, a game that was brave enough to change up a lot of the roster, it was also where some of the more caricature-esque tropes of the returning cast was tinkered with. Sure, I wouldn't call Tekken 1 and 2 Yoshimitsu a completely unremarkable character, but for most intents and purposes, he's a guy with a sword and a mask. Tekken 3 is where they introduce the sort of otherworldly qualities to his design. The grinning skull helmet and armor that almost reads as organic in nature. The red underarmor reminiscent of exposed muscle tissue, and of course, the iconic beam sword, coupled with greatly expanded upon voice work. Tekken 3 has absolutely zero qualms about getting really weird with it. A lot of characters arguably reach their peak cool potential in Tekken 3, where a character like Paul feels just fleshed out enough to be one you're very happy to control. He's a drifter, past his prime, taking street fights and doing odd jobs just to keep making his way through the world. The fact that his character endings make light of his bad luck with law enforcement and calls out the fact that he's somewhat of a relic doesn't hamper this characterization at all. If anything, it just enhances it. In future Tekken titles, it is insanely hard to trust the internal consistency of the Tekken universe, where a character like Paul is a Looney Tunes cartoon chasing aliens, while his sometimes rival Kazuya is having climactic duels with his relatives. Like, am I supposed to believe these guys exist in the same universe? On the topic of Kazuya, unlike in Third Strike, the main character of Tekken 3, Jin, which is Kazuya's son, dips his feet into a somewhat different pool of cool. One of which the series in general would pivot pretty hard into post the early 2000s. He's a bit of an edgy guy, a dark brooder, a Chunibyo character, if you will. Now, this might not seem like much of a difference. After all, Jin is a confident dude with spiky hair and a totally rad tribal tat on his left python, and in Tekken 3 it doesn't really stand out that much by itself. But this sort of edgy presentation is in itself a subversion and undercutting of its thematics. The edgy character, after all, derives their coolness out of rejecting the idea that you can be cool. It's sort of like inverting an image of a cool dude in Paint and getting Neo from the Matrix as the result. Now, you can have thematically edgy games and still have them read as self-serious and immersive. It just has to be fully embraced as with any other concept. A game like Under Night in Birth takes the edgy Chunibyo idea and really runs with it, creating a cohesive, immersive whole where the edgy trappings are all encompassing and not there to undercut something else. Tekken, on the other hand, has gone the absolute opposite direction, where it seems the creators weren't ever really okay with giving up on old ideas, while also being really enthusiastic about introducing thematically jarring elements in almost every single following title. Look at something like Tekken 7. What is the thematic link between all these different characterizations? You don't even have to invest any energy into anything outside of the moment-to-moment gameplay to see these jarring dichotomies crop up. You'll have a character like Jin, where the edgy aesthetic has been turned up to 11, face off against a bear who slapstick fights with a salmon. Or the classically cool Leroy going toe-to-toe with this Count Von Count sounding ass vampire straight from the fucking 50s. I will suck your blood! For Tekken 8, I'm hoping they end up doing something more cohesive. Even if it's something I don't necessarily enjoy or just cohesively weird. It seems to me that Street Fighter 6 is going heavily in the right direction as far as that goes. Maybe we're in the middle of a renaissance, a return to less undercutting, winking, immersion-breaking titles. Who am I kidding though? I'm just gonna end up playing against people's mutant proportion clown customizations, aren't I?